We welcome back Parag Khanna, author and senior research fellow at the New America Foundation. He's been with us all this week and will be here tomorrow night as well. Tonight, we turn our attention to Latin America. Where does a powerful Latin America fit in the world order? And who will they ally with? Hi again, Parag.
Hello.
Latin America, what makes it a new global player? Is it one?
It absolutely is. And I would say the single greatest geopolitical oversight of the 21st century, I can already declare way before the century is over, is our North American neglect of South America. Because first of all, in a globalized world of scarce natural resources, no part of the world can just be left to hang, especially not one that is so incredibly rich in human resources and natural resources and industrial potential, right? What South America represents, first of all, the Latin American economy with 900 million people is the same size as China, right? How can you ignore that? Secondly, vast natural resources, so much of the world's fresh water, now oil as well. Brazil has allegedly as much oil reserves as Russia has. And so, a very important resource sort of conduit. The whole Western Hemisphere could be completely self-sufficient without touching any resources from any other part of the world if Latin America is better cultivated and there is this hemispheric sort of alliance between North and South. So to be neglecting that is I think, just a huge strategic mistake.
Why are we neglecting them?
Well, because we tend to think of, let me ask you something. When you hear the word the West, the term, what do you think? You think of the Judeo-Christian Western Europe. Is that the way the West should be defined 1,000 years from now? Especially since Western Europe is dying out demographically. We have to define our entire sense of geography differently to answer that question. And it's something that I think is happening organically, fortunately. Europe, for me, Europe, and particularly I think for my generation, doesn't just mean Western Europe, Italy, France, Germany, and Great Britain, right? I'm thinking of the European Union. I'm thinking of 27 countries, 600 million people, and growing, the largest economic bloc in the world, despite the current troubles with Greece and Portugal and other countries. It is still the EU. It is massive economic and political power. Then North America, not just the United States as the core, right? I'm thinking the North American Union, not just NAFTA either, right? Greenland will one day be part of this North American Union once it declares independence from Denmark, right? So climate change is also changing our conception. The third pillar of the West, after Europe and North America, is South America. There is a three-pillared West that, when you think about it being this sort of block, right, it's at peace with each other. There's no war between Brazil and Germany and America, is there? You realize that the West is not in trouble. The East is not going to replace the West. The Pacific is not going to replace the Atlantic. China is not going to conquer or dominate America. The West is still unbelievably powerful. But only if you bring in Latin America and say this is a co-equal third pillar of what we think of as the West. So again, psychology and history, have led us to marginalize Latin America, to think of it as second-rate and backwards. But Brazil is really in the lead in reshaping our psychology, right? This is a strategic player on the global stage in terms of how it manages its diplomacy and its resources. It's declared a strategic alliance with China, but of course works together with the United States a lot, trades a great deal with Europe, is investing a lot in Africa. So much is going on with Brazil. What's fascinating is that you also have the potential for a sort of continental coherence and unity in South America. 13 countries, similar culture, closed geography. Brazil has really changed its approach to the region. It invests more in terms of development and aid and infrastructure around the region than it used to. It, in fact, invests more than the United States does and more than the Inter-American Development Bank or the World Bank. So Brazil is this major leader of South America that I think of as the America of South America.
Brazil's different, though, right? It's huge, different language, obviously different culture. Who else in South America are players?
Well, there are very important countries in South America. The fastest growing stock exchange is actually Colombia. Chile has been a pioneer of what's called the New Left consensus, the idea that you have pro-market policy, but also strong social welfare orientation and emphasis on education and infrastructure, these kinds of things, such that it doesn't matter who gets elected. You follow a certain continuous set of policies. So that began in Chile, and now it's the same in Brazil. They just had an election where it doesn't even matter who wins. And this is a striking statement for South America, where there have been several hundred coups in the last 150 years. to be saying, hey, it doesn't matter who wins the election. We've realized what a smart set of policies is to maintain stability. Peru just had an election. People said, uh-oh, he sounds like a Hugo Chavez. You know, the way he's going to govern is a lot like what you're seeing in other countries. So these are some of the key players. And of course, Venezuela is a major power there as well. But it's lost its luster, it's lost its allure. It is not the leader of Latin America by any stretch of the imagination. Brazil is, full stop.
So you don't see a connection between the election of left-leaning governments and the ascent of the region. You separate the two.
Well, no. I mean, I would say the election of left-leaning governments that govern like centrists and pro-market pragmatists is exactly what the dominant narrative is economically around the region today. And I think that's why you're starting to see political stability and continuity. It's hard to take a region seriously when they don't have any political stability, right? When you're trying to negotiate with someone and they get toppled the very next week. That doesn't happen anymore in South America. So I think that's part of why we're taking it seriously. But of course, again, globalization, resource scarcity, the need for the world to access Latin American resources. Now, a lot hinges on the capability of the governments to manage those resources well, to not fall prey to the resource curse, and to reinvest those revenues into infrastructure and job creation and development. And there, again, the Brazilian model and the Chilean model show that you can do that.
Chavez, I think, thinks he speaks for the region. But who are the real leaders out there? Who's speaking for Latin America?
I think he used to. Look, I would say in the last 4 years, the number of people who would actually say Chavez speaks for this continent has dwindled to, you know, close to zero, right? I mean,
maybe him.
Right, one, right? He had close to zero. He used to have a big checkbook and a wallet, but, you know, it's reached its peak. He's increasingly unpopular and challenged in his own country. So the real leaders are people like the Lulas, right? You know, the sort of elder statesmen now of the region who will spend their time traveling around the region and helping to promote smart projects. One of the real keys is infrastructure. So it's not just a person, right? Petrobras is a leader. State oil company of Brazil investing hugely in other countries, working on infrastructure corridors and all these kinds of things. That's another example of leadership that's coming from a company. The fact that Petrobras is such a big investor in Bolivia and Peru and other countries makes it impossible for their governments to come in and say, we're going to nationalize all the natural resources, kick all the investors out. No way. Because they bring in good governance, smart leadership, technology, things that any pragmatist needs to develop and harness their own resource potential.
If we look at the EU, though, they don't have a clear leader, and it's caused some challenges and problems. I mean, do we see the same thing in Latin America? Is that how it's going to play out?
Well, it's much different because Europe is much more culturally diverse. It's far greater number of countries and languages, right? Latin America has it all lined up much more easily in terms of just a few countries, and almost all of them border Brazil and so forth, just 2 languages. So Europe just has a whole different set of conditions going on. Would Europe have evolved politically more quickly had it had stronger centralized rule? But then, yes, but then it might not have happened at all. Because if you really had that one lightning rod where people could say, no way, we're not letting Brussels boss us around, they might have rejected the whole project. Instead, it's evolved haltingly, slowly, again, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but Europe is still moving forward.
If it's easier in Latin America, how come we haven't seen, you mentioned Lula, but how come we haven't seen a real single leader emerge if it's easier in that context?
Because we haven't had a Lula, right? I mean, we've had a military dictatorship during the Cold War in some of the key countries. We've had a strongman authoritarian rule, and again, lots of coups and so forth prior to that. And, you know, a whole dominant anti-colonial discourse that's dominated Latin American politics as well since the days of Bolivar in the early 19th century. So you're talking about you know, some people call it the lost decade, you know, the 1990s in Latin America. There's been a lost century in a lot of these countries. You're finally getting a few leaders like the Lulas who have come up and started to change the narrative, and they've been very healthy. Now, there were leaders prior to Lula who do stand out in terms of, you know, intellectual leadership and kind of ushering in this era. But Lula does sort of is the person who sort of embodies this today.
You spoke earlier about our North American neglect of the region. Yeah. Are we the ones who are going to gain most from a rising Latin America, or who else is going to gain from this?
Well, everyone is trying to gain from the resources, right? I mean, China has moved in a big way, India as well. Everyone is trying to capture and buy up the agricultural and other supply chains of Latin America. And Brazil, though, has woken up and realized, oh my God, this massive current account surplus we used to have with China is starting to fade very quickly. In fact, it's negative now. China is outpricing us in leather and shoes and all sorts of things that we used to be making. And now China wants to build airplanes too, but of course, Brazil is the third largest airline manufacturing center in the world. So Brazil is waking up and feels itself a bit at risk. What I am hoping for is that because wages are rising in China in the coastal areas, some American companies are pulling back from China and saying, you know what, let's go to Latin America. More political predictability for us, stronger cultural, historical connections, less currency risk and proximity. Let's reinvest in modernizing Latin America, kind of like what the Alliance for Progress in the John F. Kennedy administration was meant to do 50 years ago. In fact, when Barack Obama went to Latin America in March of this year, it was the 50th anniversary of Kennedy's Alliance for Progress. Let's work with Latin America and let's harness this region. And then we can compete with Asia in industry. Everything that's been wiped out and gone, the Detroits of the world, of the Western Hemisphere, right? We can compete if we partner joint ventures with Latin American companies. Let's industrialize and modernize and get Latin America up to speed and compete with Asia in that way. And then again, resources. If you can have Western hemispheric energy self-sufficiency, you don't need to be fighting this new global great game, energy competition with China and India for resources in Africa. You don't have to do that anymore. So Latin America, and the answer is literally in our backyard.
10 years ago, in 2001, there was a Summit of Americas in Quebec City.
Yeah.
World leaders from all over the Americas came. And they sat down, and yes, it was overshadowed by protests, but they sat down to discuss an intercontinental free trade arrangement.
Right.
Here we are, 10 years later, limited progress on free trade. So knowing this, Parag, why are you so bullish about North America and South America developing such close relations?
Circumstances are very different today. Back in Montreal, there was this notion that you could have a hemispheric free trade area by fiat. Let's
Quebec
just,
City.
right,
Yep.
in Quebec City. Let's just sign the agreement and it's going to happen, right? There was a lot of resistance to that. Plus, obviously, some of the conditions that were embedded in that in terms of the equal access for foreign corporations and stuff when certain countries weren't ready for that were certainly worrisome. But we're building it from the bottom up, right? You've got this within South America, the tremendous amount of cross-border investment taking place that wasn't happening before. They want to bring down the barriers now. They didn't want to 10 years ago, right? CAFTA, Central American Free Trade Agreement, something that the United States has pushed. You're having on a sub-regional level, right, in ways that weren't the case before. So we're building up to that hemispheric agreement that was envisioned 10 years ago in Quebec City, but we're getting there, again, from the bottom up rather than imposing it from the top down. But we are getting there.
When you say Latin America, you said South America a few times. And I'm wondering, where does Central America and the Caribbean fit into this?
Right. Central America and the Caribbean are obviously, very small economies other than Mexico. Mexico is obviously very dependent, almost an adjunct in a way to the United States in some ways. So these are, again, very small countries that need to have the infrastructure to be those conduits for exchange and trade within the hemisphere, not just gangs and drugs, not to oversimplify too much, but these are societies that haven't modernized their economies as much. It is very important that they remain agricultural and that they produce agriculture, but why not the investment to help them modernize and actually build productivity in that area and actually export more? So there's a lot that can be done for these countries, and they're obviously an essential part of the hemispheric picture.
When we talk about the Americas, we have to talk about the U.S. It drives policy in this region. What's its position as it looks towards Latin America?
Well, if only one could say one thing about the U.S. and not say the opposite at the same time with both being true. I mean, we have a situation where the White House and successive, governments have said, let's have free trade with Colombia, right? Very good example of a free trade agreement that has been stalled and held up by the Congress. So unfortunately, we don't have that political will and that recognition of the long-term importance of striking those strong long-term deals with countries like Colombia. So I'm afraid that, right now, Washington is of two minds on this. But again, I think that the organic reality in terms of the need for developing those comparative advantages and helping to boost the economies of Latin America is still important, even in times of economic difficulty in the United States, because we aren't producing that many cut flowers that I'm aware of in the United States compared to Colombia, right? We need to help these countries be good at what they can be good at, and that will help to diminish the instability within them, and that the instability that they're clearly exporting northward into the United States, right? So you have to play it forward and think long term and realize that these kinds of agreements are smart for the long term.
But your country right now is very inward looking and pulling back from this.
Right.
I mean, will the floodgates open in the time frame that you're not saying this should happen in 20 years. You're saying this should happen in the next few years, that we should start to. Do you really see this happening in any sort of practicality? That
Bits
the
and
floodgates
pieces
open?
of it, absolutely. Well, again, floodgates open, that approach is exactly what failed with the free trade area of the Americas negotiations a decade ago. I'm looking at the organic reality. Every single day, there are American companies saying, you know what, China is getting too expensive, too unstable, let's pull back, let's look at Mexico again. 10 years ago when China joined the World Trade Organization, it put a lot of joint, American-owned Mexican factories out of business. They're saying, let's go back there, let's do it better, let's do it smarter, we can compete with China. That's happening every day. That's going to be a big part of this picture of saying, let's do that. Then, alternative energy, right? American companies by the plane load, literally by the plane load, flying down to Brazil saying, let's buy into biofuels, let's work on ethanol, let's develop agribusiness. Brazil is going to be a strong partner there. It's the functional alliance. It's not a function of how many times did Barack Obama go there, how many great declarations and statements, how many summits were held. How many companies are integrating with each other, how many airlines are connecting, how much business is transacting and going on. That's what's going to build this.
Parag, Khanna, thank you for this.
Thank you.